So you find like when you start digging through like US history, like this real, especially when it starts coming into like European immigrants, is like this whole mishmash of like solidarity, alienation, and then like opposition, all jumbled in like literally at the same time.
Just finished a really great interview with Bill Campbell, author of The Day the Klan Came to Town.
Yeah, I enjoyed it very much. I think it was great.
Yeah, me too.
I think he did as well. I hope so.
Yeah, me too.
Good. Intro over.
I hope you enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, I mean, he's a comic book author and also a sci-fi writer, right?
Definitely, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I was talking to a friend earlier who, when I mentioned him, was like, "Oh, the sci-fi guy." And I was like, "Yep."
Oh,
yeah.
Awesome, and awesome guy, and I really enjoyed the comic book as well. It's great. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's like a breath of fresh air in this fucking arc, doomed madness. It's a moment when something good happens. People figure something out.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it just also ties into this arc really well because, I mean, it's the same time period that we started at. It's 1923. You know, we started the arc around then as well. And, like, it covers also issues that we're going to talk about in the next arc, too, which is, like, the de-radicalization of the narrative of immigrants in the U.S., and I think this is something that's going to keep coming up over and over again. Because like one of the things that you see in this is like, okay, it is like, as he said, not like a kumbaya moment, but it is a moment where people get together and like fight off the Klan. But more importantly, the fact that people like white people, descendants of these very people who were targeted by the Klan, no longer have any kind of memory of this kind of discrimination and like this kind of like radical resistance to like, you know, something like the Klan or, you know, whatever the bosses and their fucking mills and shit,
right, is
something that we're going to keep talking about over and over again, because it is very interesting that like you kind of have this like Hollywood narrative of like the immigrant, and like when you talk to people in the US today, they're like, yeah, well, my ancestors, you know, they learned English, you know, they assimilated, or they like, you know, they didn't do what these people now do. And it's like, they did worse. I mean, they were like,
Yeah.
like, because you either have like the Scorsese narrative of like, you know, people went into organized crime or stuff like, you know, the streets were rough and so people had to do what they did. But like, that's only like a small segment of any given immigrant population. Like a vast majority of them were like trying to join unions and like doing shit like that and getting like, you know, their asses beat by like fucking Pinkertons and shit. And like,
right.
And that's a narrative that's like not talked about at all. We touched up on it a little bit in the Italian American episode, especially,
yeah,
where there was like that really massive mobilization against like anti-fascist mobilization, the like, which is completely forgotten about. Just like, you know, this massive rebellion against the Klan when 20,000 Klansmen went into a town of like 10,000 people to terrorize them, and they fought back and killed a fucking Klansman and kicked him out, you know?
Yeah.
There's a reason why that's not talked about.
But we're going to talk about it.
We sure are.
Yeah. I mean, the comic book for me is like politically, it's perfect. I agree with everything in it. And I was especially happy because it also has a critique of nationalism, which is one of my favorite things. So, yeah, that made me very happy.
I hope they put that on the back cover. Politically perfect. Ray Cutula.
Yeah, among like praise for the book. Politically, it's perfect.
Yes. But yes, though. All right, so should we get into it?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna pass it off now to Boris from the past.
Whoa.
Boris from the past, take it away.
Dans
All right. Well, welcome to The Empire Never Ended. It's Boris, Fritz, and Ray as usual.
Hey there.
But today, we'd like to welcome author Bill Campbell to the show. Bill is the author of the recently released graphic novel, The Day the Klan Came to Town, which was illustrated by Bijan Kodabande, which is a interesting fictionalized account of a now completely forgotten riot in the town of Carnegie, Pennsylvania in 1923, when 20,000 Klansmen marched on a largely immigrant town and one Klansman was left dead. Now, I actually came across this book before it was released when I was doing research for this arc, because I've been kind of interested in the Klan's activities in the North, and I had read in the past about the Klan being used to suppress labor organizing and the like. So I came across this book before it came out, and so I was pretty excited that somebody else was digging into this totally overlooked period in history. So
I was excited it was a comic book.
Yes, that too. I like that too.
Yeah.
So Bill, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Is it your first time in Death Valley?
Yeah, it's hot as hell.
Hot here, huh? Yeah.
And yet somehow it looks like my kitchen. Anyway, yeah. What can you do?
That's no accident, Bill.
Now, Bill, Carnegie, from what I understand, is your hometown, and yes. I'm interested. How did you find out about this story? And maybe because we have a lot of listeners that aren't in the U.S., what is Carnegie like?
And are you going to get mad if I say Carnegie?
Yes.
Okay.
I will.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind.
Carnegie is how you say it, yes, because I'm an English. And it is actually one of my nails on the chalkboard things. People say it those other ways. I don't even understand where you got it from. Anyway, oddly enough, my brother told me about this. So I grew up in Carnegie and had never heard about this at all. And in fact, if you look at the cover, the church on the cover is my childhood church. Like this all went down in front of the church I went to, because I went to Catholic school.
It's nice to have another Catholic on the show finally.
There you go.
Been surrounded by heathens here.
Mary, Jesus, and children. So it was a couple of years ago. My brother and I were just talking about. So what Carnegie is a small town, literally over the hill, Green Tree Hill, from Pittsburgh. So you cross a river, go through a tunnel, go up one hill, go down one hill, and you're in Carnegie, basically. It wasn't right. Small mining and mill town. But of course, by the time I got there in the late 70s, the mines had been closed forever, and I think the mill was done too. I can't quite remember, but it's like basically a ghost mill now. So we were just talking about, it was Easter 2019. My brother and I were just basically talking about like the hidden history of Pittsburgh. Like since Pittsburgh was such a industrial area, like there were like all these different industrial accidents that happened there that they never tell you about when you're growing up there, like the poison gas attack of Denora, PA, where like one afternoon just this gas came from a smelter and killed 14 people, and just
holy shit.
Yeah, and like nobody, so it's like stuff like that. And then my brother's like, oh yeah, like the Klan riot in Carnegie, and I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? So yeah, it was like, I don't even know how my brother knew about it, because it's like something that nobody talks about. And they're talking about it more now because of the graphic novel. but yeah, so, and I even asked people when I first learned about it, people I went to school with, and literally only one person had ever heard about it.
Wow. So the incident that we're talking about specifically happened in 1923, right? And it's this so-called Carnegie Day, which typical for the Klan, they use a K, of course, instead of a C for Carnegie.
They love their K.
So clever. With a K.
Okay, yeah.
So yes. Why did the Klan choose Carnegie? Like what? I mean, this is a pretty big march, right? I mean, it's like tens of thousands of people. Why did they choose Carnegie, and what do we know about like what went down there?
Well, basically they chose Carnegie for the main reason is that Carnegie, even to this day, is full of European names that you can neither spell nor pronounce. So, and it's kind of, 100 years later, it's kind of hard to wrap your heads around it for a lot of people. But, Southern and Eastern Europeans weren't considered white when they first got to America.
Right.
So they were just a huge target for the Klan because, they were there to protect Americanism and, the white race. And I think they called it racial suicide back then, right? So they were like, if we let all of these, Southern and Eastern Europeans into the country, the white race will be eliminated in America. So that was the main reason, because it was such a heavily immigrant town. And then also they chose that particular street because there were two Catholic churches on the same street. There was the German Catholic Church and then the Irish Catholic Church, which is the one I went to. And oddly enough, across the bridge, there's actually another Catholic church on the same street, which is the Polish Catholic Church. So they had like a lot of huge targets to just kind of pick from. And then there's even then there was a Ukrainian Orthodox and a Russian Orthodox church too.
Right. I think the opening panel of the book is this kind of, I guess, view of Carnegie, and you see these two onion domed Russian looking churches.
Yeah, those are still there, but I didn't know until I researched it that they'd been built before, so they were standing back in the 1920s. But when you look at other pictures of that, they were that main street, which is now a really big main street, well, for a small town. But then that was basically covered in coal dust, because that whole area was just one big slum. and people just basically walked out of their door and walked into the hill. In fact, we used to live on the top of the hill, and we built a house there. And anytime you built a house, you had to have special foundations built, because you were literally building on top of an abandoned mine.
Oh, right. And isn't it the coal mining companies, I think, still own the mine property even after it's abandoned or something? I know there was read some kind of crazy stuff about that. Yeah.
You went one layer deeper than I did on the history there. But yeah, so that was basically it. Was just that half the town was Protestant, but a large part of the town was immigrant. And so it was just an easy target. And, as I said, Pittsburgh was right over the hill. So Pittsburgh's a very easy place to get to. So, it was a really good target.
Right. So the half of the town that is Protestant, one can assume, is the side that kind of brought the Klan in, right? Maybe not.
I don't think the town had much to say in it. We do know that the chief of police was pretty much sympathetic to the Klan. He might have been a Klan member.
Right. But, yeah. You bring that up in the book.
Yeah. But I don't think that, because the Burgess, or what would be the mayor, he was Irish. So he didn't want it there at all, them there at all.
Yeah, Irish didn't join until the 60s, right?
Well, I mean, that's sort of that's sort of the progression of whiteness, right?
Yeah.
You have to have your sort of how much do you hate black people? And then you just kind of have to prove it over time, and then it's just okay, now you're white.
Yeah. That's one of the more interesting things about this book to me, was this collection of people who, most of whom were not yet white. And it's interesting to have to remember a time when being German Catholic still made you kind of
they killed them.
White. Yeah.
But they killed them. And that was sort of that was one of the points that I was that I felt was kind of interesting, because I tell people, the interesting thing about being a Gen Xer and growing up there in the late 70s and the 80s, basically the 80s, right, was you kind of got the tail end of that, just when like they're becoming white, like at the tail, dovetail into whiteness, like that identity. So like, so you get to see like in the 70s and 80s, they still didn't really like each other that much still.
Right, right.
Even though there had been a lot of like intermarriage and stuff like that. Like, and like, so like you remember, hearing like people your parents' age talk about mixed marriages, and what they meant was, like the Jewish girl married the Italian or the German married the Irish, and you're like, that's a mixed marriage? That's not what we mean now, right? Like, and like, oh yeah, my grandparents didn't talk to my mother for like years because she married an Italian, it's like stuff like that,
That's right.
So that was one of the things that I kind of wanted to bring into it, was just like, 55 years after that, or 60 years after that, these people were still calling each other just horrible things. I mean, which is just kind of rarer now. Like now all these people are white. Like you don't hear like the jokes that we grew up with. Like, but I mean, I still remember like Polish jokes and Italian jokes and just down the line, right? So it's just kind of like showing like how it kind of operated, right?
Yeah. Right. Because I think that one of the things that shines through in the book the most is this like immigrant experience of this town that, I mean, I guess if a lot of people now think of, Western Pennsylvania and Ohio and the like as, like white Trump country, whatever. But if you go back to 1923, you'd be hard pressed to find like a native English speaker and the like. And that comes through really strongly in the book because you use a lot of non-English languages. I mean, there's a lot of like Italian. I think I noticed Vietnamese as well. Yiddish, I think.
Slovenian.
Slovenian, yeah.
Did you get the Slovenian joke?
No, I looked it up. It's a song, no? Marcus Kacha or something like that. Yeah.
No, because it's like, because I was like, if somebody speaks Slovenian, they might find the scene funny, because it's like, because he's talking about going back home and winning the girl over, and the song is all about like a guy going back home and to get the girl, and the girl rejects him. But
that kind of humor,
sorry, don't worry about it. It was well, okay, so there's being in Death Valley and all, like you guys know that like the common way that a lot of folks kind of combat like the latest immigration wave, right, is saying that, oh, this is a nation of immigrants. Immigrants built this country, but they all assimilated. So one, being black, I have a problem with this whole nation of immigrants thing, period, because, we were here 200 years before like the first waves of immigrants actually got here. So the country was already built. But that's a side note. But the other thing is like, they use that whole false narrative as like a cudgel against whoever the latest wave of immigrants is. So like when you go back, you're like, no, these people didn't like assimilate. We didn't welcome them with open arms. Like the same complaints you have now is like, oh, you don't speak the language and all that stuff. Is like literally what your grandparents or your great grandparents, they didn't speak the language either, and a lot of them never ever really did.
Yeah.
So like to become this watered down American is like a longer process than you want to actually admit. But like we all do become watered down Americans, ultimately. And especially if you decide to embrace whiteness, like you basically just kind of strip away like all of the European homeland traditions that you have, and might keep the food.
Yeah. And even that, that is usually some like Americanized version of
right.
The
well, I mean that
I
don't have a problem with, because it kind of has to be.
Right.
What I mean? But so I did want to like point out that if you went to my hometown, which would just now be like white suburban kind of Western Pennsylvania place, if you go back 100 years, you would hear like a dozen languages being spoken.
Right. Yeah, you wrote in your afterward something about how whiteness is erasure or something like that, I think.
Yeah.
And then I watched an interview with you where you said something how you made a good point saying how before becoming white, a lot of these European people could dance before they became white, which is like very interesting. And I think it's also, I really like the scene which is in like happens in Italy in the book, and it's how these like northern Italians mistreat Southerners. And it's a very good, I think, very brief but to the point critique of nationalism, I would say. And the whole Italian risorgimento, the idea of creating a nation and so on. And I think it's similar, like how whiteness was created in America. It's very similar to nationalism, no, in some sense.
Oh, I mean, definitely. Well, okay, so like the main character, Primo, that's what we'll call him for this. Like the main character, like literally popped into my head. So I was traveling from Toronto back to here where I live in DC, but I had to stop off in Pittsburgh because like my wife and my mom make me spend the night there if I'm taking that long a trip from Toronto.
There's worse places to stop.
Huh?
There's worse places to stop than Pittsburgh.
Well, it's I go to the Toronto Comic Arts Festival. Like I table there, so like I can drive straight the 10 hours straight to get to Toronto, but it's a half day on Sunday. So like by the time I hit Pittsburgh, it's really late, and that's a halfway point. So they're like, you just stop and spend the night there.
That's wise.
Yeah, exactly. Because I'm older now, so I go like, yeah, I got nothing to prove. I'll just go sleep. I'm driving around. I have to drive around Carnegie, and that's when Primo popped into my head. Mm-hmm. And I think like the reason that he popped into my head was a lot of talk around birthright citizenship at the time when Trump was talking about getting rid of that. And a lot of people that I went to school with were for it, like getting rid of birthright citizenship. And a lot of them, and a disproportionate of those number of those people were like Italian. So I think that's why it popped into my head. And then just researching like this character, you just kind of realize like Sicilians and Sicily just have a lot in common, not only with, Black people, African-American experience, but with, with a lot of common immigration tales, period, especially what's going on now, right? Because as you were saying, Ray, Italy was imposed upon Sicily, right? Mm-hmm. And Sicilians within that whole process are victims of racism, right? Like, and that was one of the things I thought was really interesting, that the racial pejorative that Northern Italians use on Southern Italians are the same pejorative that Italians use on Black people here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in that scene they call them Mulagnans, and they also like mention something how they're like musical people or something like that.
Yeah, so there's like all these different similarities, and I think that racism and nationalism are probably inextricably tied, right? Because at least in probably since the days of like colonialism and imperialism, because like you're really fighting over like a national identity, right?
Yeah.
Like America is like constantly fighting over like this idea that it's a white nation, as I said, like a nation of immigrants, right? But like literally, Black folks get here in 1619, and the first waves of European immigration aren't until the 1820s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right.
So the very foundation of America is a lot Blacker than we ever admit. But but if you do that, like if you start admitting that, then America can't function the way that it does.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like, for example, close to Carnegie, there's the first Croatian Catholic church in the United States in Millville, Pennsylvania. And it's well known for these like world famous murals by this artist Max Ovanka, which along with depicting like the struggles of like Croatian industrial labor also has a very kind of candid for the time description or portrayal of capitalism being built on Black labor as well. And of course, this is, in a Croatian Catholic church in, the 20s or I think 30s maybe is when the murals were done. And yet, just a few decades later, the Croatian community in that region produces, John Kasich. Right. So where there was this kind of maybe it's generous to say like depiction, like solidarity at some point, that gets completely erased. Right.
Well, I mean, when you start looking at like this whole, white formation, right? Coming from like Bacon's Rebellion on forward, like as I said, like, the definition of whiteness, like when you really start looking at it, like, because I had to like re-up on this stuff for the tour that I just did for this, and you really do, like, whiteness is just like opposition to blackness, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right.
And then in the post 1965, when we started letting like more brown folks in, then we kind of run into like a sort of wall, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's sort of like, well, we want these new immigrants to also be in opposition to blackness, but we can't quite let them in.
Right.
Yeah.
Some of them might end up being light enough that we can say that they're white, but a lot of them just like, so like that's like where we are right now, is that kind of troubles. But so you find like when you start digging through like US history, like this real, especially when it starts coming into like European immigrants, is like this whole mishmash of like solidarity, alienation, and then like opposition, all jumbled in like literally at the same time. Mm-hmm. I was reading one about this whole, it was like in Illinois in 1895, when a bunch of European immigrants decided to try to ethnically cleanse the black people out of town, and like, but they weren't white yet. So like it totally backfired on them. Uh-huh. So, by 1895, ethnically cleansing, black folks out of town was pretty like, de rigueur, right? Like it's like, so they were just like, yeah, we're going to do what they do. And like the white folks are like, no. No. So it's like this really funny, well, not funny, but kind of funny scene where like they attack the black folks, and then they go like, okay, the next day, you guys need to get out. And the black folks are like, how dare you attack Americans? And then the white folks, who would have, probably ethnically cleansed themselves, are like, right, how dare they attack Americans? I can't believe this. And then the black folks in Illinois are like, we're armed and we're going to come and take you out. And like in town over, they're like, yeah, we got like 200 repeating rifles here. We got Winchesters, like, and we're coming to town. Right. And like, so they like the Italian consulate was like telegraphing like public officials all in Illinois, like, arrest all the black people.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it's like turns into like this huge crazy thing, and then like it ends up like the Wobblies end up like intervening and saying like, okay, like the town's officials get the Wobblies in, and like they're like, okay, just make sure like the black miners are safe and the black folks are safe, and then the cops come and arrest like a bunch of the European immigrants and put them on trial and throw them in jail for like attacking black people.
Damn.
Whoa.
Because in 1895 they weren't white yet. If they had waited like 40 years or 50 years, they probably would have gotten away with it. But in 1895 they couldn't get away with it. So it's just like this whole like just clusterfuck of just like contradictory things, because these immigrants, like nobody's white when they get here.
Right.
So like you're in like this weird kind of like, so like when the immigrants got there, it's like whites on the census data, right? You're white, but then like there's like these subsets, like you could be like a blonde haired, blue eyed Italian. They'd be like, yeah, you're white, but you're like dark white, or
right.
like or they'll like note like the language that you speak. Just let them know that you're not quite white. Mm-hmm. And that's how I found out like who was participating, or who was probably participating in the riot, was going through census data, because it wasn't like, because a lot of it was just like, well, if you're not black, then you're white. So like it would have that, but then it would have like the different languages that people spoke. Mm. So that was kind of how I got a sense of like who was actually in the town, because there's not a lot written about like the actual participants in the riot.
Right.
It happened in a section called Irish Town, but it, like all anybody would say was like Irish and others. And like we also know, because I do deep in the woods, like ethnic neighborhoods aren't as homogenous as we always portray them to be.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because the German Catholic Church was literally 2 blocks down the street.
Right.
And we knew that like Black people also lived there because the census data tracked literally where every Black person lived.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you about that because one of the other major characters that comes through is Freeman, right? And and I was curious as to like, I mean, so you just explained to us how you came up with the idea of Primo Salerno, who's like the kind of main Italian character here. But where did Freeman come from? Like, how did you come up with his character? And I was kind of curious whether Carnegie was segregated at the time or not. I guess it kind of seems that it wasn't so much, no?
No, I mean, even in the 20s, in the North, in some areas like Chicago and stuff, that they were trying to do like neighborhood covenants and stuff like that. But, Carnegie is really small.
Right.
So that was one thing. But also, I mean, things aren't necessarily as segregated as you would think, especially like in those kinds of, because this is before World War II, right? Before redlining, before like, the U.S. government is just like, no, we are going to deny, Black people can't live in these new towns that we're building, right? So, people kind of live more on top of each other than you think. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I knew that so Carnegie's really small. And
how many people are we talking at the time? So like in 1923, what was, do you know, like approximately?
I'm trying to remember because I think somebody said like I think I read that the town was about 11,000 and probably like half of them would have been the target of that. So you're talking about like a really small group, but as I said, like Carnegie is like a really small place. And all these people would have been living in a very small area. And when reading about the riot, like I knew that preparations were going on. Like, so the Klan has this big rally up on top of this hill, which I guess was technically maybe a mountain. I don't know. I'm from Western Pennsylvania. I don't know. But there's a farm on top of a hill. So like basically imagine like 30,000 Klansmen all on top of this hill. And the town knows that they're going to attack, but they don't know where.
Yeah.
So I couldn't imagine when they were like Irish and others that like the Irish would have been the only ones, resisting.
Right,
sure.
right.
And also, as I said, like we know that, and I think that probably the Irish get credit for it because it did happen in Irish town.
Right.
Which wasn't as Irish as you could imagine, right? Because as I said, the Germans were living there too. Like everybody was living all in these little areas. So, and also we know that like, like wood fencing was being ripped down, like cobblestones are being ripped up out of the streets. Like these people were just gathering up anything that they could to fight the Klan. And that was happening all over town. I figured that some semblance of all these different people were probably there.
Right. And that's because this is mostly fictionalized, right? I mean, what you wrote.
Okay, so how this works is like there wasn't much written about it, right? But so it's just like a couple of chapters in different monographs and stuff like that, and one judge's autobiography from like the 1960s. Like it was just like weird, like and then so that's when Primo popped into my head because like not much was written about it. But there was a guy who was arrested for killing the Klansmen. But nobody talked, so he got off. So then I was like, okay, I can still stick with my main character then, because nothing's been proven. When what was written, they talked about what the Klan did. So we have the Klan side of the story, and we have like the public official side of the story, but we don't have like the resistance's side of it. So that's the stuff that I had to kind of imagine. But like and then there were a couple of things fictionally that I had to like play with, because the actual street fight is a bit more complicated than what we portrayed, but it wouldn't have made sense in a comic book format.
Yeah, I was hoping you could expand on that a little bit. I've heard you say that in another interview, actually, and I was curious to know what couldn't make it in.
Well, when the riot happens itself, right? So, like, basically, the scene in the beginning happens the actual event happens the way it does. Like they march down with all these torches and they're stopped at the bridge, and the Burgess, when they give their freedom of speech argument.
Yeah, of course.
And they're allowed in, and the melee starts. So what ends up happening is the Burgess was basically abandoned by like 99.99% of all the public officials in Pennsylvania, because they were fairly sympathetic to the Klan.
Yeah, sure.
Because they were all what we call now WASP.
Right.
Yeah. However, during that riot, one like county official like rushed to Carnegie and actually got them to stop.
Oh, wow.
So he's just like, you guys got to stop this. This is crazy. Go home. So then the Klan says, okay, we'll go home. They retreat. They start marching back up the hill. Then they basically go, fuck it, and then just rush them.
Okay.
And just like beat the living hell out of them. Now, like to me, that's a great movie moment.
That's awesome.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
that's the way to go. Yeah.
But in a comic, it would be like marching, fighting, one panel turning back, another panel fighting, and people are like, what the hell just happened?
No, I got you. Yeah.
So there was just, that was just sort of like, a technical thing that we had to get rid of because of the medium.
But this is nice because, somebody reads the comic, maybe they dig a little deeper and find these details, and they find out that the reality of it's even cooler, like it's a fun Easter egg.
Yeah. And then, and then as I said, like, it's just really just an amazing story of just like people just being backed in the corner and just like refusing to be stepped on, and like and unlike so many other incidents in history, like they actually win.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So the Klans, one of the Klansmen was killed, right? Now you said that happened like pretty much on the steps of the Catholic Church that you attended.
Right.
How much is known? So there's pretty much nothing known, as you said, of like who fired the shot, what happened.
Well, there was a guy, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, and they said the shot came from the alley in which we used to fight.
Ah.
The old rumble alley there.
During recess. But as I said, like kind of like nobody talks because the Klan. So one of the things that's kind of interesting, right? It was like the Klan was, people don't realize like the Klan in the 1920s, which you guys cover in one of your other podcasts, is that the Klan was at the height of its power. And they were making like really huge inroads in Pennsylvania at the time. So they were a terrorist organization, but as you guys know, they also portrayed themselves as a civic organization, a family-friendly organization, and then they were breaching into politics, like the actual mainstream politics. So like this moment in time was where like that was the first step in them stopping the Klan from becoming a real power in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
Right there on those steps. So that to me was kind of interesting, was like the first thing that kind of stopped the Klan from being in Pennsylvania, like happened literally in a place that I had to go at least once a week. And then like a couple, and one of the other interesting things was like the Klan actually had a martyr list. Like they literally wanted somebody to die.
Wait, what do you mean?
Basically the marketing technique was if somebody died during one of these events, a Klansman, like the martyrdom of the Klansman would boost recruitment.
I mean, it's a win-win.
I mean, this is why they do this even today, right? I mean, like, when the Klan does marches, they do it through like black neighborhoods or, there was in like Toledo, Ohio, right? In like 2005, there was like the National Socialist Movement march through like North Toledo and stuff. I mean, they still do this today because they want to like provoke violence. It's just that at the time, the reaction to that was much heavier than they could expect today. Maybe give or take a little bit, but
I think the thing I think that probably in the future, if more things like January 6th take hold, I think that the reaction to these people will resemble more like what happened in Carnegie than it does now. I think that, yeah, when, the Klan or the neo-Nazis have been marching in the past, 40 years or so, it's been like 12 of them.
Yeah.
Right? And like the
Not
police
20
president, right? Yeah. So like the police presence is like, much larger than the Klan presence, and the police are there to protect them. So nothing's going to happen. But if you have like more Charlottesvilles or more, January 6th, or like what was happening in DC in December and stuff like that, I think that I wouldn't be surprised if things got more out of hand. But to continue, after that, a couple of months later, the Klan also marched in, I think, Butler, PA. To they assembled even more people.
Oh wow!
And the town even assembled even more people and beat the living shit out of them. And then the Klan was done in Pennsylvania. Even though in Carnegie, the next year in Carnegie, they did start a Klan chapter. Like I got to see the plaque. It was like, so the Klan. And not only that, in the 1924, I think, phone book under secret societies, they had the Ku Klux Klan's phone number.
Oh,
yeah, very secret there.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is that there's at least other secret societies that want to list themselves in order to justify its own column, right?
Yeah. There were like two secret societies. One was the Klan. And oddly enough, which something else I found out, which shows you like how just mixed up this whole thing was, that same summer in Johnstown, which isn't that far from Carnegie either, the town literally kicked out all the Mexicans and Black people in the town.
Oh damn.
So it's like this whole racial history of PA and the country is just, I mean, there's a reason why we erase all this.
Right.
Yeah, because one, it's really ugly, but two, it's very mixed up. Like, and then you find, like you said, in that church that, these currently white people weren't necessarily so white back then.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then there are these moments of solidarity that make you just kind of question like the whole process, that racism imposes on us and makes us think, or makes us want to think certain things, right?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm kind of a nerd for like research, because I found your book when I was researching like the Klan's history in the North, and I'm like, you were hinting at like some of your research processes here, like going through census data and the like what all did you have to do to like kind of construct this world that comes out in the book?
Read a lot about immigration.
Yeah, sure.
Well, my dad was an immigrant. I mean, it was pretty boring. He came as a college student. So it was, he was like part of that class of 65 when they're like, okay, we're gonna let brown folks in, but only certain kinds.
Mm-hmm.
So, which gives us that whole model minority thing. I was like, wow. Look at all these overachieving people. It's like, no, you only let them in. So like, yes, if you only let in like, middle class people, they're going to probably end up middle class. Anyway, whole other thing. But basically, as I said, like the riot part was pretty simple because there wasn't too much to research. Like there just wasn't enough available information. So the research process was basically reading about the Klan at that period and reading about, and then just trying to imagine what that riot was like. So that was the easy part. And then kind of just, because there were some things I already knew about Italian immigration from just my kind of dilettante history buff. I just read any old random thing that sounds interesting kind of stuff. But just kind of like going more into like the history of like Sicily, and because I definitely wanted to make them Sicilian. Because Sicily, as I said, had Italy imposed upon them, and and then they had like the problems that brings, right? Like huge amounts of violence and crime and all that stuff. So basically, they were yesterday's like Guatemalans or Salvadorans or whatever, where like the situations are pretty much mirror images of each other. So I was just reading a lot about that, you know, and reading about the differences, because I always knew growing up there that there was a difference between Southern Italians and Northern Italians. I knew vaguely just from being adjacent to that. So that was pretty much the process, was like reading up a lot about that. And then just other random things would just pop into my head, and then just having to research those things. So, you know, it was sort of like I picked their hometown because I read that like people made a special fun of that town because it was so close, because it's like the closest town to Africa. So they just kept calling them Africans.
Okay.
And then randomly I was just like, wait, because, you know, I'm Catholic. I'm like, wait, doesn't every town have like a patron saint? And then I looked up and it was like actually a Black Madonna. And I'm like, oh my God, it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Nice. Yeah.
You know, it was just like stuff like that. And
Tapestry for the win.
Exactly. And then Bijan, you know, the artist is also, well, he's a professor at VCU, but he's also a bit of a stickler for details. So then that would also take us down like weird kind of rabbit holes of research too. You know, like finding out like in Italy that there was like a maternity girdle, and then we were trying to figure out, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah. Lore.
You know. Huh?
It's lore. It's
yeah. So, you know, and once you get into like, I mean, pretty much like everybody's kind of fascinating once you get into their history.
Really, I mean, it's almost. I was a little frustrated almost that it was only Primo's story, even, or mostly anyway. It's not only Primo's story, but it's it's mostly his, because I did want to know about everybody. Like, I wanted to know everybody's backstory, you know.
Yeah, but also to answer your question about Freeman was, I come from like on the American side of my family is coal miners and Marines. So, basically, one branch of my family has basically been coal miners since, I don't know, the turn of the last century, like basically since emancipation. So that was sort of like a nod to, I mean, we weren't Freemans, but it was just sort of a nod to, you know, like those folks.
Right.
Like I briefly grew up in a coal mining town, you know, so it was just sort of like, and I couldn't imagine the Black folks not fighting in that, since, you know, it was the Klan.
I mean, that was my first reaction when I read this, was like, oh, the main guy's Italian. Like I wasn't expecting, you know.
Well, I mean, a lot of people weren't. I mean, that was part of.
It's very effective.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people weren't, because, like, yet again, like we don't teach our own history.
Yeah, right. Can I ask a nerdy art question about this? I don't know if you know the answer, but do you know if there's an artist named Flavio Costanini, I think. He did a lot of the art on, like, okay, maybe not.
No, sorry.
I'll ask. We should have him on the show. We'll ask him.
Yeah.
Did it remind you of those like Italian propaganda posters?
Oh,
like the anarchist ones from like back in the day? Yeah, that's exactly what it made me think of.
The anarchist
as well.
ones, yeah, exactly. You got that sense too?
Well, you know, oddly enough, like one of the reasons that I think that Bijan's art did pop into my head was because I was thinking of, like, you know, socialist, like, and like I was thinking of that, like that time period. You know what I mean? Propaganda art, and I was just like, that's what he would do. Like, so, like, I don't know the exact artist that you're talking about, but like I was hoping for like a similar kind of feel.
Yeah, I don't know the artist that Fritz is talking about either, although I think I know what he's alluding to, and that's what Bijan's art made me think of as well, because I was looking at this and I was like, man, this really looks like those like 1920s, like, you know, like the depictions of like the robbers, like Italian robbers.
And it's the bold lines,
and like the mustaches and the
yeah. Okay, well, Bijan, if you're listening, Flavio Costantini, is that it? Did we crack it? We'll get super nerd points if we get that. So
no, you do. But like, actually, that period of art and like that whole kind of, you know, socialist kind of, you know, like that feel was in my head, like when we were envisioning it.
Yeah, so. Great. Yeah, it really has that vibe. Yeah. I noticed. I was also really happy to see the word Americanism said outright in this. I was wondering why because we've been focusing on that term a lot in this last arc. We weren't even kind of out to do it, but the term kept coming back, and from like Henry Ford's days all the way through to John Birch and beyond. So I was wondering what your relationship to that word was and why you picked it.
Well, I mean, because that's like one of the words that the Klan used, right?
Uh-huh.
And to get back to what Ray was saying, just like the whole racism and nationalism thing, right? I mean, it's always a debate that we've had like since the country began, right? What is American and what isn't, right? And it is wrapped up in like white, right?
Yeah.
So it's just like, Black people aren't American, and indigenous people aren't American, like literally weren't even counted in our census for what, like 150 years or whatever.
Yeah.
So like this whole idea of Americanism is an imagined thing, but it's an imagined thing that like people literally die of.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's what January 6th was, right?
Yeah.
And this is like what America is fighting over, like since Obama got elected, and we're going to be fighting over it probably pretty harshly for the next 30 years, is just like this imagined Americanism, because, we're like as Black folks, we're basically like the oldest ethnic group that's been here. Because like both the Dutch and the Dutch, the Spanish, and the English bring us here. So like we're like, and it's all like 1619. Like we're the one, right? Right. But we're never American.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even though Americanism, and I mean, like you said, you earlier alluded to like whiteness being created as essentially a counter to blackness, and like the first time you see white really in like English literature, not literature, but rather just English language, is in laws, as far as I understand it, against miscegenation. So I guess there's also that problem of the co-creation, both of Black and white and American. And how it's really incredible that that's an ongoing battle.
Right.
No,
but when you look at it, when you look at the food, you look at the culture, you look at the dress, you look at our music, like it's all like Black.
Yeah, anything good
about
America was either brought in from somewhere else, or was Black. Yeah.
But it's not American, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there was like a certain point where I was like, I was reading about, what is it? Frank Yankovic, right? Like an American polka, right? And when he first starts playing polka in America, it's not popular at all. Mm-hmm. And then he like incorporates jazz elements into polka, and then it becomes popular in America. And I'm like, holy shit! Even polka is Black. Like,
as a Texan though, I gotta say as a Texan that polka also has a very strong Mexican.
But I'm just saying, like, no. I mean, trust me, I understand it, but I'm just saying, like,
but are you sure you want that one though? Really?
What?
You sure you want that one?
I don't really feel like I really have a dog in it.
In the old polka fight, in the who gets polka.
Like I got like the whole Pennsylvania Pittsburgh polka thing from my childhood and the Steelers, and like that's about as far as I go. Yeah. But no, I just thought it was kind of interesting. Like as I said, like obviously polka isn't from like Black folks, but it was just like the fact that he had to like inject some like Blackness into it for it to become popular.
Right. For everybody to listen to it. Yeah.
Right. And you just like, but that's like so much of like America yet again, but we're not American.
Right. I mean, like the whole like, typical like, the banjos, like, whatever this like, so that's like based off like West African instruments or something.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean the guitar is African. I mean it's just like all this stuff. It just goes on and on and on and on and on, right? So that was pretty much one of the things where. But go ahead.
Is Americanism just a huge attempt to be like, no, it isn't?
Yeah,
we're not Black. No,
right.
I'm
not saying that.
Yeah.
I mean, right, but I mean, it's like, basically, America is like a mongrel nation. right? Like it always has been. But like we have to impose upon, because like the powers that be rely on it, is that like it has to be white. And now that we're in this place where like it so clearly will not be white, a white nation.
Yeah.
Like it isn't now. Like it's like, what was it, like 60, it's only like 60% white, and even still like they admitted that like a bunch of the people who said that they were white also checked other categories.
Yeah.
So right. So now we're gonna have like this huge battle over this imagined thing. Right?
Yeah.
Right. And I was talking about this last night at a talk at VCU, was like, because this whole battle over critical race theory being taught in schools. But just think about this, right? Just imagine. So at different times, even though George Washington, our founding slaver, did not want like Black soldiers, he needed them.
Yes.
Right. So at certain times, the Revolutionary Army was like as much as like 16% Black. Right. And it was fully integrated. Right. So they weren't like digging ditches while the white men were fighting. Like these folks were fighting alongside of each other. And of course, America repays us by saying, no, we're going to keep you in chains. Right. You fought for freedom, but we're going to keep you in chains. Thanks. Right. But just think about like how that, like just that, like being taught that, like having images of that, like when you're growing up, completely changes your idea of what America is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I guess for nationalistic purposes, it's a lot simpler than something saying like, well, what is an American? Well, okay, anybody. Well, okay, well then who was the first American? The people that were here before the Americans. I mean, like, it's not a clean nationalist narrative,
Right.
What nation is there,
I mean, I joke that Black people are America's but.
Yeah.
Like, America's the land of the free.
But. That's good.
Yeah, we believe in equal treatment of everybody. Yeah.
Freeman kind of does that in the book, though, right? Because like a lot of times he's kind of telling the immigrants like, look, like it isn't quite so simple, right? Like we've been here for a long time, and like whatever are still struggling, and that's how it kind of like his character is always kind of bringing these immigrant groups back to like reality, kind of bring it down to.
Well, man, I kind of envision like everybody is kind of checking each other.
Yeah.
In that, because like the one character is like, the Jew doesn't have a friend in the world, or like the Armenian guy was like, y'all just like stood aside while like they killed us all. I mean, there's all like, I kind of wanted to like kind of put in like, because something like this done in like a more mainstream press or like a movie would be more of like a kumbaya kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I was just like, I just really wanted to like hit the whole notion that this wasn't a kumbaya moment.
Right.
And everybody had their own beefs and their own prejudices, and like, we don't really like each other, but the Klan's here. And like, to me, I think like, because people have been asking like, how is this relevant, or and I think that because we're always brought up with this whole idea of kumbaya moments, that people don't realize how actually messy like solidarity or working together actually is. And that I think like one of the things that this book kind of illustrates is that you don't necessarily have to agree on everything, and you don't even necessarily have to like each other to work together.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I like what you said, actually. I think that's a nice motto for America. Like, we all have our beefs, but the Klan is here.
Exactly. Yeah. Right.
Get
so let's
frosty,
not. Yeah. So it's sort of like we can argue over terms later because like the Klan is here.
Right. I mean, I think like like they say, one of the characters says something like, "They will not win tonight," and like tonight kind of being like the operative word there, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that in a lot of ways, I mean, that's kind of like what resistance is, right? Like, I'm a publisher, right? I'm a small publisher. And, a lot of times the whole idea is like, we survive today, so like tomorrow I am still a publisher, and that's like, we survived that calamity. And I think that a lot of times you just have to look at it like that. Like, I know, like, American like dystopic films and books kind of try to give you like this whole like, and then the whole dystopia was because of one bad guy, and we beat him. So we're all back out of the cave and like, woo, great. But no, it is literally like you cannot win tonight, and we will fight tomorrow. And we will go on tomorrow, or like, I will go until like, the kids can take over, and that's just kind of like the way you need to approach these things.
Yeah. I mean, this whole decision to base like Americanism or American nationalism on whiteness, really, it has not only like horrible consequences, but also kind of very bizarre. Like we watched, like I'm not American, and we watched Birth of a Nation.
Keep bragging about that, right?
Yeah,
I get it. You're not American. I get it.
Yeah. So we watched Birth of a Nation for the podcast, and that's such a demented, fucked up film.
Yes.
And it was like a mainstream, like it's screened in the White House, and it doesn't make any sense at all. Like, I mean, I guess it makes sense, but like a film that idolizes these like slave owners were not only like just horrible people, but also like traitors who went into an armed insurrection against America, and then they are like basically the patriots, the heroes of the film, which is screened in the White House. I mean, it's
the real Americans. Yeah,
it's totally fucked up. I mean, it's really, I don't know what to say. It's demented. Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of, I mean, I'm 51 now, and I just sort of like have come to realize like one of the things that I find so interesting is like, these are things like, so many things in this world just like don't have to be, right?
Yeah.
And you're just like, and when you go to like American history, right? I mean, this is like, you go back, but like almost 400 years, right? And there's like this little rebellion here in the Chesapeake, and where some natives and some black folks and some white folks get together, and they try to beat the shit out of the landowners, and it's led by a landowner himself, who was actually not like a hero in the story. But and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, we have to figure out a way to separate these people because we're outnumbered, and then they come up with like this notion of race, which kind of already existed, but not in the way that they ultimately, and it takes them forever, right, to figure out what it is, and we still don't know what it is.
Well, because they were fucking making it up. I mean,
right, exactly. They're totally, and you read like those law formations, and some of his stuff is just like,
bonkers.
You just have no clue what you're talking about.
No idea. It's really obvious.
And you shouldn't, because you're making it up, right? Yeah. And then you're sitting there going like, so this decision, this kind of like temporary kind of solution to a problem, right, ends up being the model for like colonialism and imperialism and all this horrible stuff.
Yeah, to a problem, by the way, that was really fucking stupid, that you didn't need to have, you just had because you're an evil fucking shit.
Right.
It's not like a natural problem that somebody had to solve. Like,
right, exactly, right. It was, how can I make more money? Like, that was like literally the problem. And like,
thanks,
you could have, you could have like come up with something else, but no, you're like, no, we have this thing that's born out of slavery. I think we're going to end up calling it capitalism, and like, let's go. But you look at like this stuff, like there was like this temporary solution that 400 years later has caused like millions of deaths. Millions and millions of deaths that have pulled all of us into that. Right. Yeah. And it never had to be. And like, and we can't shake it.
Yeah.
And so it's just, it's just so baffling and just so like, and you can look, right? Like you can even look at like, like the British or the Austro-Hungarian or all these different models of imperialism, like they actually all have racial categories, right? And it's all the same, it's literally the same thing, right? It's like you name a tribe or ethnic group, then they had like a racial category for it, and like these characteristics that each one, and it's just this utterly ridiculous thing, and you don't even know how it can possibly happen, right? Because I mean, shit, I mean, you look at me and like I have ancestors from more European countries than your average white person will ever have. None of it voluntary, so it's not anything I celebrate.
Yeah.
But I'm nowhere near white. right? Right? But there are like 5 or 6 different places where I can go where I have an ancestor in Europe, where I have an ancestor, right?
Yeah.
So at least one. Some way too many. Yeah. Yeah, it's just like utterly ridiculous. But
yeah, well,
here we are.
Birth of a Nation portrays people who like are mixed race as the ultimate evil. Like it's not the black people.
Yes.
It's the mixed race people. They are the agitators. So they are yeah.
And also
magic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I mean, it's kind of interesting, right? Because it's like mixed race people are the ultimate evil, especially if they come out of the womb of a white woman.
Yes.
If they come out of the womb of a black woman, not as evil.
Yeah.
It's like, we don't really, I don't know how that happened, but yeah. Magic, right?
There's your magic, yeah.
But as you're saying, like, it's totally, when you really think about, like, just the origins of it, like, it's such a ridiculous origin and so absurd that it can't help but being, like, still ridiculous and absurd and just horrifically tragic.
Yeah.
Because it's, like, something that has pervaded the entire globe.
Yeah.
Right? And it's something that has caused wars in pretty much every corner of this planet.
Yeah.
And it never had to be in the first place. Wow. Okay, that was sorry about that.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. We didn't write the jokes, you know?
All right.
Well,
so, go ahead.
Well, thanks for giving us, a comic book that, helps remember that it's not... It doesn't have to be like that every day. There are some days that can come by that completely upset like hundreds of years of effort and can produce some kind of a positive result. But you got to fight for it.
Even if it's temporary. In this case, like the Klan had a hard time reestablishing itself in Pennsylvania. But as you said, Johnstown later on kicked out its number population.
That's kind of, it's one of those things where basically, it's an interesting snippet in history, I think, and it kind of like interrupts like the narrative here. And one of the things like when doing the book that I actually thought was kind of interesting that we've never really talked about is like, what if they decide not to choose whiteness? Because at the time they probably could have, like they had the numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And are you in a way trying to remind or just, I guess, inform some of Americans that their ancestors were not white, even though they are now part of the club? Do you think that's important for them to realize?
If white folks are reading it, I kind of just did it for myself because I thought it'd be like an interesting story. Like I was interested in it. But I think that they could serve that function. If you really wanted it to, because even now, like a lot of racists like will admit that race is a social construct, but here's like how it actually works.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think it could serve that purpose if somebody wanted it to, but I think that it's something that I think in America that whiteness is going to be the death of us.
Amen. Yeah.
So I think that white people need to probably go amongst themselves because I don't have time for that. And figure out how to do that.
Fair enough.
Do you think white people want to hang out with white people? Have you met white people?
I have. Some of my best friends are white.
Okay, those are the good ones, though, Bill.
But I do think that maybe this would be something that could help somebody like rethink that. Maybe that could help. So anyway, anything else, gentlemen?
No,
I think we've kept you on for a while now.
I quite enjoyed it.
I would just like to tell everyone to definitely check out The Day the Klan Klan Came to Town on PM Press. Yeah, you can buy it both digital and hard copy for a reasonable price. I was very satisfied with how much it cost.
Cool.
And Bill, people can check out your other works on Rosarium Publishing, right?
Yep, that's the company that I own. Yes, it's named after my father.
It's named after your father? Sorry?
No, my daughter.
Your daughter.
Rosa, yeah. Who's named after Rosa Parks and Zora Neale Hurston. Her name is Rosa Neale.
Nice.
Oh, okay.
Cool.
Rosarium. But yeah, we do science fiction and comics, all with the multicultural flares. I like to say, whoever you are, you're in Rosarium. So
awesome.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, make sure to check out Bill Campbell's works.
Yeah.
And thanks for coming on the show, Bill.
Yeah, thank you guys. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Stay out of the sun.
Cheers.
Bye.
Ciao.
Hey there, Fritz here from The Empire Never Ended. This has been one of our weekly free episodes for free people. But for premium people, we also have weekly premium episodes, which you can get at patreon.com/tenepod, TENEPOD, and also follow our various social media things in the show description there. Like and subscribe them. Follow them. Like and follow and subscribe. Follow them. Do it.